For as long as I can remember, I have loved jazz. Because